morning. My name is Dr. Richard Kitts, and I'm an anesthesiologist, retired more than 10 years ago. But in my previous life, I was the anesthetist-in-chief at the Massachusetts General Hospital and the Dean for Clinical Affairs at the Harvard Medical School, and also held a position as co-director of the Harvard-MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology, and was the Henry Isaiah Dorr Professor of Anesthesia also at Harvard. But among my other accomplishments, if those weren't enough, I know John Francis Ryan. And we have today the opportunity to interview John, who's been nominated by the Wood Library and Museum to be a member of the John Pender Living History Society. John, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dick.
John, you've done so many distinguished things in your career, in medicine in particular, the things that you did at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, and then later here at the Mass General and Harvard. We need to get you back to where you were born, here in Boston, 75 years ago. Could you briefly tell us about your family and life in Boston at that point?
Sure. Well, my father was the oldest of 4 children, and in the 6th grade he had to leave because his father died.
Born here in the United States?
Yes, in Charlestown, right outside of Boston. And he was wounded in the war and came back, became an automobile mechanic, met my wife who had come from Ireland, my mother who had come from Ireland, and she had my sister, and 5 years later they had me. And the doctor at that time told her she was going to die. And so I was in a house, we were born in Rosendale, and the neighbors all took up a collection for her burial and mine. And when we made it, I came out as a breech baby, and everything was fine. They wanted their money back. So it was a very good beginning from that time.
Well, let's move right
Yes.
to your schooling, John. Early on, when you were a youngster, did you go to parochial school, private school,
No, I went to
Catholic school?
Public school, the Francis Bachman Grammar School. I still have my P that I earned in the 7th and 8th grade for softball and basketball, which I am proud. It's my only letter. The school was great. I just loved it. And we were 1 year before the parochial school. I wanted to go to a Catholic high school, and my father passed away in my 8th grade, so I had to go to work, so that was important because her mother was sick. And I went off to Cathedral High School and did well there. And I was the valedictorian and the class president this junior and senior year, and
In
got
high
into
school,
a lot of
John,
troubles.
what is the most important thing that you would like to share with us in terms of your accomplishments in that portion of your schooling so far?
Well, the grade point average is a great thing, but I was asked to come back to my grammar school to be the keynote speaker at the graduation. And that for me was a very seminal moment, because I was able to talk about my mother, who was in the audience, and make the talk all about her. And that gives me a great feeling every time I think about it, because it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And there were a lot of other honors. I became the first president of the Catholic Youth Organization in the Archdiocese of Boston, and the first New England president of the Catholic Youth Organization, the CYO.
Let me just stop you there and ask, with all of this great Catholic education, your Catholic family, do you ever think of becoming a priest?
Not very much. I did for a little bit. I was an altar boy, but I was thinking of being a lawyer. I was going to be the mayor of Boston and the governor of the state. And then I went to work for a law firm on my senior year of high school as a messenger. And I saw that the partners' sons were on the top floor with the partners, but the partners' sons just played golf. They were losers. And all the people below and the partners were all the workers, and they did all the work. And I saw if you weren't a partner's son, you weren't going anywhere.
And John, then of course you went to college, and of all of the colleges and universities here in New England, and so many of them here in Boston, you went to Boston College. Why?
I went to Boston College because the nuns told me, don't apply to Harvard. because it's a bad place. That was those days. And so, and they said, you should go to Stonehill because, you know, and I thought that's kind of a lesser. So I applied to BC, Boston College, and I got a $100 scholarship, but I couldn't go to college on $100 because it was $400. So every week they kept putting the ante up, and finally it was a full scholarship, and that got me through school for 4 years.
John, in the course of your 4 years there at Boston College, you had to plan for your ultimate career. Did medicine factor into that, or were you still going to go to law school?
Yes, I had. I was a best man at a wedding, and one of my cousins had just left after 11 years studying for a Jesuit, and he had 3 doctorates, and he was a lawyer going to Washington, D.C. to work for the State Department. And he told me that if he had to do it again, he would be a doctor, because it was like a plumber and an electrician. You did things with your hands, you saw results, you weren't in the confessional hoping that people got better. And that really impressed me. So I called up the next day and changed. Today, you could not do that at BC. I mean, you know, you can't get in. They have 30,000 people applying for 2,200 seats.
Wow.
And so I changed my major to pre-med. And in my junior year, I knew I made it because they showed us a picture of an ear operation, and 2/3 of the class left because they were getting sick, and I didn't get sick, and I knew I could do this. So I mean, it's very simple things in life that make that get you where you think you're going.
John, you've mentioned your principal accomplishment, at least by your own opinion, as before you got to Boston College. What would you like to share with us, the single most important contribution that you think you left there at Boston College?
Well, I started 13 extracurricular activities while I had a full-time job and a part-time job. I think that was probably the most thing. I ended up being the valedictorian of the class. That was wonderful, terrifying and wonderful. And I think that was the major thing. And also the pre-medical course. It was governed by Father Michael Walsh, who became the president of the college the year we graduated. And we had a magazine, and it really became a good little magazine called The Scope, Pre-Med magazine. And they do a fine job of getting the students into medical school, so that's important.
John, medical school. There are 4 medical schools here in Massachusetts, and there's more up in New England, yet you went down to New York. You applied for and was admitted to PNS. Why did you select PNS?
I selected PNS because I had a 2.5-minute interview with the chairman of anatomy department, who left, and I was waiting for the next person, and I really thought this
was in New York at PNS?
Yeah, that this was never nothing would happen. And 2 days later, I got an acceptance. And he had asked me one question, and that was, you guys always go to Harvard when we accept you. And I said, well, I don't have that happy circumstance of being Harvard and having an acceptance at Harvard and Columbia, but if I did, I would tell you within 2 weeks. So I called up Harvard, and they said, oh, we don't make any decisions till February. And I said, oh, come on. You can make, I mean, let me just tell you my situation. So they said, well, we don't make any decisions till February. So I wrote back to Columbia on Thanksgiving Day and said, I will come. Interestingly enough, I have the letter in Dean Ora Severinghaus when I wrote to him and said, you know, I had worked for the Air Force studying atmospheric electricity in Florida that summer of my senior year, that I had saved at least $300, and that was it, because we didn't have anything else. So it was like $35 in the bank, and a little third floor, two room apartment. My mother and I. And so he wrote back to me and said, you can't come to medical school, but come along and we'll see what happens. And I went along.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
John, while you were going through medical school, ultimately you have to think about what kind of practice of medicine are you going to aim for? Oh,
no question. I was going to be a cardiac surgeon. I would go in my sophomore and junior year with Dr. Paul Russell, who ended his career in Mass General, being the head of the transplant team. and a wonderful man. And he would let me second assist and first assist, and sometimes even lance things, because I'd be there Saturday night, Sunday morning, anytime that he was operating, I was there. And so I had my whole plan, and I was going to go off and do 4 years of surgery, 2 years with Dr. Huffnagel, and 2 years at chest at Cornell, and then go back to the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital and be on the cardiac team.
John, let me ask you, you know, one of the great departments of anesthesia in those days was right there at Columbia.
Yes.
Dr. Emanuel Papper, a good friend of yours and mine, was the chairperson, and Virginia Apgar was still there. Did you have any experience with them? Did you talk with them at all?
Well, no. My only experience with Dr. Apgar, I anesthetized her, which is a whole story in its own, and you probably don't want to hear all that, but it's a great story. And
you want to briefly tell it, briefly?
Yeah, I'll do it very briefly. Dr. Papper sent me down to see her. I walk in, she said, "Ryan," right away. She has all these books. "Did you read this? Did you read that? You read this? You read that?" And I kept on saying, "I have to interview you because I have to, anesthetize you tomorrow." Yeah, we'll get to that.
So you were a resident?
No, I was staff.
You were staff, okay.
Yeah.
So we've
oh,
jumped
yeah, we have the
ahead.
big, you only send the staff down to, we jumped ahead a long way.
Okay.
And so she kept up, and she was really a talker. And I finally said, when you stop talking, oh, she said, "How will you know when I'm asleep?" I'm sorry, I missed my joke. "How will you know when I'm asleep?" She said, "When you stop talking, I'll know I've made a good beginning." And she laughed. She said, "Ryan, you and I will get along just fine."
And so it was.
And so it was.
Well, John, you graduated from PNS. What do you think was your most distinguishing legacy, that which John Ryan is known for those 4 years you spent there at PNS?
Oh, well, I came in 5th. I never thought I thought I was 1/20th. I really did. I couldn't believe that Dr. Papper, when he finally offered me a job, that he would offer me a job. It's interesting how you think of yourself.
So you were 5th in the class of 120?
Yeah, we are all our worst enemies. Yeah, and when we, I would rather tell you a story of, for me, which is the most memorable thing, which really helped to kind of frame the way I think about medicine.
Please do.
The first day of the 3rd year, you make rounds, and you have a little short, white, stiff coat, and you try to stand behind the person in front of you so that no one will ask you questions. And Dr. Calvin Plimpton, who had been the president of the American University at Beirut, was leading grand rounds. And we came to the first bed and spent 45 minutes, and it was a lady with scleroderma. And then we went to the next bed, it was leprosy, and 45 minutes. And we went to the next bed, it was lupus erythematosus. And it was like a pantheon of amazing medical esoteric diseases. And we got into the corner, and there was Mrs. Kelly, who had a metastatic melanoma, who was being shipped out the next day. The resident said to a rehab hospital because they weren't going to be able to do anything, and we left in about 3 minutes. And we got all finished rounds at about 11 o'clock, and Dr. Plimpton said, "Go across the way to the amphitheater on 8 and sit there and wait for me." And he came in and he brought down the chief resident, and he said to him, "I want to know that everybody can hear me." And we all said, "Oh, yes." And he said to the resident, "If we don't spend 10 minutes longer at Mrs. Kelly's bed tomorrow than any other patient, you are fired." And that was the best lesson I could have had in medicine. And it was really typified for me, Columbia. It's such a humanistic place. Wonderful medical school.
Great story, John. But there's another story built there. You got married.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
tell us a little bit about Joanne.
Oh, well, Joanne Leary, and now my wife Joanne, of 51 years. She's my life.
When did you meet her? There in New York?
No, I met her on a moonlight cruise. I was the New England president in her deanery of 26 parishes. We had a cruise, and her mother didn't want her to go, but the parish priest finally talked her into going.
How old was she then, John?
16. And I was a freshman in college, and she was just going into her senior year of high school. And I looked across the top deck in Boston Harbor, and I saw the most beautiful blue eyes. True. And she's gorgeous. She had pictures that were right by the of her engagement to me that was right by the end at the Boston Public Library across the street on Boylston Street, and also in the Prudential Building, a big 8 by 10. And people would stop on the street and just, you know, turn around.
And this was your Joanne.
Yes, but inside was much more.
Well,
and
she was 16.
Yeah, so I said...
She was a little older when you married
That's right.
her.
So I said, you know, you stay your senior year and then we'll talk afterwards. But I kept cards and letters and things going. And in the summertime, I would thumb out 26 miles to Franklin from Forest Hills.
Is that where she lived?
Yes, it's tough. But she had 6 beautiful sisters, so I could always get one of their boyfriends to give me a ride back home. And so I would see her in the summertime.
Is this while you were at PNS?
No, this was in college.
College.
After she graduated and went on herself. And then I didn't see her till the freshman year of medical school, and I always kept her picture, and then I just happened to call up, and she was out on a date, which was very infuriating. And so anyway, we came to have dinner at my house, and then we went to my boss, who was a physicist who was in the Air Force, and we visited his house. And on the way home, I always will remember this. We must have had a little tiff or something about something, and she told me to take gas. And it probably was an omen. And the first time I thought of anesthesia. Yeah, it's not true, because I didn't even think of it at that time. So I was still going to be a cardiac surgeon. And so
But you got married actually while you were a student in
Yes, in the middle of the 3rd year. Yes. And I saved for a long time we went on our honeymoon to St. John and the Virgin Islands, and we were the 48 people on the island, and no one else lived on the island. It was Rockefeller Resort at that time. It was an idyllic spot. It was wonderful.
Great story, John.
Yeah.
So, you know, all of us in that particular era were subject to the Berry Plan and going into the service after we had finished our medical training. And I noted that you selected the Air Force.
Yes.
Why did you select the Air Force, John?
Well, because I had worked with the Air Force down in Florida, and after that, all during medical school. Oh, I forgot about that part. During medical,
just briefly.
Yeah, quick. We get into the space program. So I developed the calibration technique for micrometeorite detection devices that were used on all the satellites.
Let me stop you here. Were you in college or were you in medical school?
Medical school.
This was during the summer months?
Well, it was, I would go back to the lab anytime that I had a free weekend, sometimes, or during a Christmas break in the summertime in the freshman year. And then in the sophomore year, I went to the Montreal Neurological Institute for 3 months, so I couldn't do it that time.
So this lab was run by the Air Force?
Yes, it was Cambridge Research Center. It was at Bedford Air Force Base, and they were all MIT scientists whose they did things for the Air Force like evaporate vapor trails and things like that. And
so it was a natural that you selected the Air Force?
Yes, and that's why I did.
Where did they send you?
Well, that's an interesting story, and I'll do that in 2 sentences, I hope. I had written that I would go to the Northwest. They lost all my papers. So, you know, I get no communication. So I finally call them up, and they say, we can't find anything. And then they said, why on earth do you want to go to Alaska? And I was the only person who ever applied to go to Alaska, but I thought I was applying to go to San Francisco, because to me that was the Northwest. So from Boston, you know, you go to Wellesley and turn left. That's how you get to California, you know. And you gave me that book.
Yes.
And so we went off with 2 little boys and drove across the country to Vandenberg Air Force Base with 10 Titan 3C missile sites, 10-story buildings.
The Air Force missile site. Where is it precisely located in California?
Vandenberg was in Lompoc at Point Mugu. It sticks out above Santa Barbara, 54 miles above Santa Barbara.
So just north of LA.
Yeah, and there were 10 hydrogen bombs that were pointed at the cities around the world, and my next door neighbor pointed them every day.
But what did you do?
Oh, I was the chief of anesthesia.
And your duties were?
Oh, I had 3 ORs, and I had 3 people who were nurse anesthetists, which I had never seen a nurse anesthetist. I didn't know what to do with them at the beginning. And luckily they were competent. And
No other doctors, the physicians?
No, I was it.
Anesthesiologists?
Yeah, I was the one. And so that was March. I went in, they let me go early, March, St. Patrick's Day I arrived. And on April 1st, I opened the first intensive care unit that I know of that was opened anywhere, at least in the Air Force, in 1965. I took anybody who had an IV. I had Sergeant Madagamy, who was the best sergeant, and Captain Piper, who was the best nurse, and she went on to the NASA astronauts program and worked there. And they were terrific. And so we just had a wonderful time there.
John, prior to actually your appointment out there at Vandenberg Air Force Base, you had your anesthesia residency. And you elected to come back to Boston and go to St. Elizabeth's here in Brighton.
Right.
Why did you select St. E's?
It was the only rotating internship east of the Mississippi. There was one in Detroit, but home was Boston, and my wife missed her family a lot, so that was a natural.
And you were still going to be a surgeon at that time?
Yes, I started and did a year of internship and a year of surgery. And then in the second year, one of the fellows got mononucleosis, and they needed a volunteer to go on anesthesia. And I thought every time those people had a problem, it was a problem. I never had a problem. I just cut, clamp, fix it. And I was always in control, but the patient's black, and I mean, it was scary. So I better learn about this, you know. And also anesthesia practice in the boonies was a lot of physicians did it, and it was hit or miss.
So you were a surgical resident at St. E's.
Exactly. And so I went, and I couldn't believe the fun I had. All the things I could do. It was just, and it was wonderful.
So you changed at that point in time,
yes,
and joined the anesthesia department as a resident.
Specialties. And then I finished my 2 years at that time of anesthesia. And
what do you think was your major accomplishment there at St. E's?
Well, I did the first paper that had ever come out of the anesthesia department at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Was using intercostal catheters, which was a big deal at that time for post-operative pain relief.
Was that published?
Oh yes, in Anesthesia and Analgesia, and they also made a movie that they showed in 1966 in Denver at the ASA after that. And it really was very hard to get that done. It was really a one-man show, and I did pulmonary studies of FEV1 to see how people were breathing better or not breathing, and I had to have a balanced cohort.
John, after your 2 years there at Vandenberg, you came back to Columbia.
Yes.
I believe that was about 1967 or so.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your early days there at TNS, back at Columbia, your old stamping grounds.
Well, let me just say one quick thing, because that'll lead into it. I was going to go into private practice, and then I went to a Mass Society meeting, and Dr. Pepper was the speaker, and he gave you kudos, and Bob Epstein kudos, and he's wonderful that way. He talks about everybody and himself. And the other resident, there was only two of us, John Whalen, said, "You got to go up and talk to him." I said, "I don't want to bother him. You got to go up and talk to him." So I went up, and an hour and a half later, I had agreed to come 6 months later. So 6 months later to the day, I went and was interviewed by Dr. Hanks, and Dr. Bob Epstein, and Dr. Richard J. Kitts, and Dr. Lenny Brand. And then I went up to Dr. Kitts' office, Dr. Pepper's office, and he said to me, "Well, you're going to go into the Air Force for 2 years, and we'll have a job writing for you." And I was horrified, because I said, "How can you hire me? You don't know anything about me." And he said, "I have your whole medical career from medical school." He said, "And that's much more important than what your chairman says, because they sometimes want to get rid of you."
Well, John, that was a marvelous decision on his part, of course. I think it's fair to say that for your first 2 or 3 years there at Columbia, you were actually in my lab, and we had a wonderful time. But not really very many people knew the John Ryan that everybody knows about today, until 1970, when you suddenly burst on the anesthesia scene. You published a paper with Manny Papper as the junior author yet. It was published in Anesthesiology, I can remember vividly. And it was malignant fever after anesthesia and following. And of course, this was the first description of syndrome, malignant hyperpyrexia. Now, all that occurred at Columbia Presbyterian. So tell us about that first patient that you encountered that defined the rest of, not the rest of your career, but a large chunk of it.
It did, tremendously. Mrs. EZ was a 5'11", 185-pound African-American lady, had 2 children, and she had a very strange history, but didn't make any sense. And they finally went to the psych clinic, and she seemed to get a little bit better. She was having all these muscle things.
So she was in a medical service at the time?
And she was having a tonsillectomy.
Ah.
And her tonsil had grown back. So she was going to be wide awake. I mean, all of my patients wake up like that, you know, and I was priding myself on this. She didn't wake up. And I left the tube in, and I'm really puzzled. And she was breathing this strange respiration. It was really Kussmaul respiration, but I'm not going to admit that to myself because at that time, because I'm thinking it couldn't be this. And then as we moved her over, she felt hot, so we took her temperature, and they didn't have a temperature, they took it rectally, and I was a little concerned about them doing that, and it was 99 degrees. And within 15 minutes, she was above 110.8 on the thermometer that spilt mercury out in her chest, so who knows what she was. That can't happen. It was 15 minutes.
So what did you do?
She arrested, and we were putting ice in every cavity, and I put down a big tube into her esophagus, the gastric cooling unit that had been sitting, gathering dust, thankfully, in the corner at Presbyterian, and we ran that in with 2-degree alcohol at 1.8 liters per minute, and her temperature was still, at 15 minutes, was still beating on her chest for another, well, it was almost 45 minutes. She finally came down to about 36, and she survived, and I stayed with her the whole weekend. And I finally remembered that my wife and children were waiting to go to Boston that weekend, and told the nurse that somebody go down and tell them to go back home. And I stayed and slept by her bedside, and I went downstairs and tried to read anything. There was like one paper in the literature in the library, because I always had a key to the library, which I kept from medical school. And so I could go down and read that, and we stayed over the weekend with her, and she did very well. And I ended up having privileges to admit her. It was the first, and I think anesthesiologists have admitting privileges at
Were there other cases that followed her that came your way because of your experience?
Yeah, I've had 6 cases under my own hand. They all lived at a time when about 85 to 90% of the people died.
Yes.
And we didn't have drug, we didn't have dantrolene, we didn't have the curative things at that time. And so people would then call. I ended up with about 1,100 families that I took care of. That would come, and this was all for free. We did at the General, we would get phone calls all the time. It was very hard when I was in the OR, because I'd be pulled from, you know, do I stay with the child, the baby, or do I go out and talk to somebody from Berlin or who's having a problem, you know? And I knew the problems are big problems. So you'd have to, you have to go and talk, because this is life and death, because they die within about a half hour or so.
Yes, that was such an important contribution of yours, certainly a singular one, in as much as the mortality rate was around 85%, and here you were having people that lived. And I can remember a plethora of papers that came out under your name after that, including a couple that actually in the New England Journal.
Yes.
So you not only described malignant hyperpyrexia as a syndrome, but defined the anesthetic management of it. And then later, mostly up here in Boston, we studied the lesion that actually causes that in human
Well, we
beings.
had a wonderful lab that had the clinical basis, which was myself, and then Dr. Paul Allen, Dr. Frank Schrader, Dr. Jose Rafael Lopez, who could put a little glass cell into a single muscle cell. So we're able to anesthetize pigs who have the same syndrome. Unhappily for human beings, we have a plethora of causes, and the pig only has one gene that's abnormal, and they're breeding it out of the pig. So,
John, another event happened to you in 1969, when I came up here to Boston to succeed Dr. Beecher. And at a meeting that you and I attended with the faculty, it was announced by Dr. Papper that you were going to accompany me up here to Boston. Tell us how that occurred, because it defines how anesthesia departments were run in those days.
Oh boy. Well, Dr. Appert told you in the lab that you're not raping the lab, you're not taking everybody, you're not taking all this stuff, that Ryan is staying here. And then, okay, he's staying here. So Bob Epstein, who was my lab partner, who ended up being the chief for about 28 years at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, a wonderful guy. Bob said, you know, John, are you going? And I'd say, no, I'm not going. Dr. Papper won't let me go. That's it. I'm staying here. And you were taking this in the lab and that in the lab, and we weren't going to end up with much left in the lab because it was gone. And you would have had no time to do it when you think about it. But you had Leon, so
yes.
Braswell, the lab tech, so
yes.
he was the
key
person. And so anyway, we get to this dinner, and Dr. Papper says, well, you're going to have a toast now, but hold half of your glass full for the second toast. So he made my 26th chief, and he did a beautiful job, Henry Isaiah Dorr, professor of anesthesia.
Well.
We're going to bring Columbia North to Mass General, and you know, culture to the boondocks, you know, in his typical fashion. And so, and then the second toast was to, and I'm sitting across from Bob Epstein and his wife, and with Joanna on my side. And he said the second toast is to John Ryan, who's going with him. And that's how I heard.
And that's how I heard that you were coming to Boston.
And Bob wouldn't speak to me for 2 weeks. He was so mad at me because he said, you knew all the time. I said, Bob, I didn't know all the time.
Well,
you did know.
That's actually the way anesthesia departments and major academic centers were run in those days. It was Geheimrat.
Well, the reason he did that was because he would have taken care of me and stayed there, but he was going to be not only the dean of the University of Miami Medical School, but he was going to be the president of the 5 hospitals.
Yes.
So that meant he could say, the dean says yes, but the president of the hospital says no. So, I mean, you talk about power. So he had, that's when he decided he would go there. So well, that's why he
and you and I came
sent us off.
Up here to Boston to the Mass General.
Yes.
And you continued your work on malignant hyperpyrexia, of course. But then along the way, there was another turn in your career. You became a pediatric anesthesiologist.
Yes.
Tell us how that happened.
Well, we had a fellow by the name of Eric Fuhrman, who was very good, but he was a South African and very strong person.
He was the head of anesthesia at the pediatric
anesthesia, yes. And Dr. Hardy Hendren was the surgeon. And they would have every Thursday a big fight, come to your office, go to Austin's office, and then start about a 12 or 15-hour day at noontime, because one had been 20 minutes late. So Eric Fuhrman would go and take 40 minutes and sit down in the Baker cafeteria by the clock, and then come up, and then they'd fight, and then they'd leave, and then they'd do this, and they did it every Thursday.
How did you become involved, John?
Well, I saw that they did such good work that, and I love children. At Columbia, every Friday I was allowed to do the radiology things from 4 to 7 at night. Herb and Ernie, they didn't like to work.
These were pediatric patients.
Yeah, down in Baby's Hospital,
yes.
And it was a terrible situation. I mean, there was no recovery area, there was nothing. They would shut the lights off and leave you in the dark for 20 minutes while they'd go off and look at x-rays and things. And you'd have a bronchoscopy in some really sick child.
So why did you go into pediatric anesthesia?
Oh, I just loved that. I just loved that. And I saw that this area would go down the tubes, you know, if they just let somebody do it, you know, if somebody just who didn't care. And I wanted to do that. And I was running the floor, you know,
This is at the Mass General.
Oh, yeah.
Supervising a complex of operating rooms.
The first, can I tell you the first and second day there? Or not?
Why don't we move on to your career here? Because
yeah.
Something else very important happened to you. This was now almost 20 years later. You decided to go back to school.
Yes. And
you went to the Harvard School of Education, and you
yes.
got yourself a master's degree.
Yeah, at the Harvard Graduate School of Ed.
Yeah. Well, why did you do that?
Well, I always thought education it will always be a weak sister. I mean, you can see how much, you know, Harvard Business School gives this, and the education funds and the theology funds are here. well, it's okay for theology, but education is a big deal. And nobody tells you how to teach in the OR. And that's what I was really interested in. You know, they say, okay, we're hiring you on the staff, go teach. Well,
did that help you be a better teacher?
It was amazing. It really made a tremendous effect on my life. I was the oldest graduate they had. I graduated in the year 2000 at the age of 65. And I'm sure there's older people now. But they gave me a hard time. But they were so wonderful, and it was really eye-opening. I'll just tell you.
What was the name of your thesis, John?
Well, it was teaching in the operating room.
I see.
And the thing that got me was the first day, Dr. Duckworth, who was Piaget, who is a god. And the bad thing about education, they have gods. We don't have gods. You know, every 2 years it changes in medicine, and you got to keep up, and you got to keep up, and what was right is not right anymore, and that's a very good thing. They have gods, and so this Dr. Duckworth was a lovely lady. She was the assistant dean, and we all sat in a circle, and she said, "You cannot learn unless you are in a safe place." And I laughed right out loud, because the last thing I could care about my resident was being him in a safe place. I'm worried about the baby and the mother and the father. Those are my concerns. And my concern for him is just to keep him on the straight and narrow, right? And to teach him everything that he could learn, everything. And not so he would have a million arrows in his quiver. Well, when I laughed, she said, "John, come up here." And she just destroyed me, because that was so important, because you can't learn unless you're in a safe place. And if the resident is scared out of his mind, they don't hear you. And if you talk too much, they don't hear you. And if you stand down below them rather than behind them, you see them. It's very important things. All these little things I picked up that when I would go back to the OR, it was like gold. It was gold. I
remember vividly when you came back to the anesthesia department with all of that kind of information.
Yeah, well, I was able to, out of the OR, call up all of the 109 people that give anesthesiology, the people who were like the bottom feeders, who were rated by our superb residents, because they are superb, as not doing too well. And I would then call them at home, or if I could meet them in the hospital, outside the hospital.
These are junior staff you were talking about?
These are junior staff, or some weren't junior.
At Mass General.
And yet they were rated, and
I hear you.
I would meet with them either on the phone or in person, and they would talk for 3 hours, and they would just, oh man, everything was wrong. You know, the chief nurse didn't do this, and the guy who was running the floor was doing this to me, and this was wrong, and that was wrong, and people didn't understand.
But ultimately, pulled all of that together.
Well, my ear would fall off, and then I'd say after about 3 hours, we'll talk in 2 weeks. And then we'd talk in 2 weeks, and about 2 minutes into it, I'd say, well, just tell me what you think the problem is. And they would nail it almost 85% of the time. And then I would go for about an hour with them, letting them find it again, because I wasn't quite sure this was right. John, because if they didn't find it, it doesn't work.
Well, certainly the department marvelously improved when you brought back some of those things.
Yeah.
John, in the course of all of this, the 3 boys that you had back at home were maturing.
Yes.
Tell us a little about all 3 of them, very briefly, John.
I will. Christopher Chip is a landscape architect. He works at UMass and does all their computerization. He's self-taught computer person. And during his 3 years at UPenn, he graduated from Worcester College, went to UPenn for 3 years and got his master's there in landscape architecture. And he would spend every Saturday for 8 hours in the computer lab learning.
So he's in Worcester now?
He's in Worcester, and he works there. And
Chip?
That's Chip. And Andy is 2 years younger than Chip. Chip's 49, Andy's 47. And Andy is now in Tuscany. He's a world-class photographer. He was chosen by Hasselblad as one of the 2 photographers in the world to make a video ad of their new $50,000 megapixel camera.
Wow.
He speaks for them. He does the Cheesecake Factory. He goes around the world for State Bank. They send him around the world every year to do their brochure. He did all the buildings at MIT, 14 buildings. So, and he's doing a cookbook for the man who does the most cookbooks in the world.
And finally?
Tony. Tony, our young son, graduated from the School of the Great Books, St. John's. Fabulous school. If I could send anybody to college, they would go to that school. He went to the one that was in
Florida, wasn't it?
Santa Fe, New Mexico. Oh. That branch. The other branch is the third oldest college in the country, then William and Mary, then Harvard, and that's in Annapolis, Maryland. And it is a fabulous school for education. It's just marvelous. And
so what did he learn there?
And he has a master's in education, and he is
How does he utilize this, John?
Well, he's teaches, and he does work for Sylvan Learning. He's their medical director, educational director in Naples, Florida, and he also tutors children, and he runs a St. John's type seminar for about 20 children and their parents every week. So he has a very busy life, but he loves it. So, and they all have such tremendous integrity, and it's all due to their mother.
John, well, that's going to take me back to an incident that occurred actually in Miami, Florida, many years ago. But if that incident hadn't been appropriately handled, and Joanne had something to do with this, you and I wouldn't be talking today. So tell us about that.
Oh yeah, I was having angina, which is in Greek chokiness, and I was giving a talk at in Atlantic City at the Federation meetings, and then I flew home to Boston, and I was still having this chokiness, and I was sweating, and I was feeling terrible, and I did a whole bunch of things, and then we took off on a plane after coming back from Atlantic City and doing a whole bunch of things at work and changing clothes and getting food and for the babysitter, and off we went, and on the plane I was just really in trouble. I couldn't see. I could only see the ground, and I ended up in the room, being put up in the room on a luggage carrier. They wheeled me up.
In a hotel?
Yeah, in the hotel.
In Miami.
Yeah, on the beach in Miami. And it was a conference of pediatric anesthesia, and Frank Moyer was running the conference. Mm-hmm. And so I remember saying to Joni, I just want to go to sleep. And my suit was soaking wet. I mean, you could have wrung it out. I was mm-hmm. just drenched. And I couldn't see, I couldn't feel my legs. I just couldn't feel them.
And what happened?
And she said, I'm calling 911. And she called 911, and in 7 minutes these guys came and said, pulse 36, blood pressure 30 over 0, atropine. And I said, I tried to say give it slow, but I couldn't talk. Mm-hmm. And then I had chest pain for the first time, but it wasn't bad. Mm-hmm. The chest pain wasn't bad. But it was interesting. Every time I'd go like around a corner or down the elevator, I'd be unconscious because I had no venous return. Mm-hmm. Now I thought this was great. You know, it was very interesting because you don't say I'm scared.
But after your atropine, you didn't get out of bed and start.
Oh, you kidding? No, I was still unconscious. I'm almost unconscious. I was in trouble. And then Frank Moyer came, and the guys got me together and brought me to Mount Sinai Hospital. And they had a guy there who couldn't read the EKGs who was on, but
you survived.
Yeah, I survived. Yeah, I was 6 weeks in the ICU.
And you thrived.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yes, and I think we have to pay homage to your dear wife.
Oh, she saved my life.
You first met at age 16, but yes. She saved your life some months later.
And she's been saving my life ever since. She's just wonderful.
Well, John, I thank you on behalf of the Wood Library and Museum, as well as the committee that has selected you for this opportunity. You truly have distinguished yourself, and those who know you enjoy your reflected glory. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.